Well, students, this is Professor Del Russo, and I want to make a few comments about your discussion boards for Learning Module 3. This was the discussion board that dealt with children and language, or the linguistic abilities of children, and how linguistic development works. Now, I sensed a lot of frustration among some of you because you weren't getting the kinds of responses that you expected from a child, or your children were non-responsive. And some people had suggested that maybe the questions could have been expressed differently, and that's a good observation. In fact, that's one of the lessons of forensic interviewing. Despite our best efforts, the most experienced forensic interviewers sometimes make errors of language and ask questions that are awkward or cumbersome or inartful and are difficult for children because they're small and inexperienced and immature. So the remedy is to say the question differently. And you don't need to know exactly what the problem is with the child, you just need to change it up. Now, these questions were designed to ask about common words in the legal system. These are the kinds of words that lawyers might ask, judges might ask, that might wind up the subject matter of legal proceedings where a child may be called upon to testify or to provide a narrative about some event they experienced, whether their own molestation or they're witnessing or being part of a crime. And although you, and I know many of you are in child protection, could understand and see that some of the questions were developmentally inappropriate, the lesson here is to appreciate how they are developmentally inappropriate and how come when kids do give us responses, they provide certain responses. And one of the more difficult aspects of the English language are homonyms, and also words that not only are spelled exactly the same, but are spelled differently, but sound the same. And of course, these auditory discrimination errors, where kids hear a word, they approximate its meaning to something that's relevant to their lives, and they give you an answer. And if you were doing a forensic interview, you might be suspect of the child's credibility. You might be concerned about whether they actually get it, or whether somehow they're flawed or cognitively impaired, when they are just children who have certain linguistic limitations. So to them, jewelry for the question about a jury is the best response and the only response that makes sense to them. And we need to be able to understand that this isn't a child who has any cognitive difficulty. They're just being normal based upon their developmental level. And our question was bad. It was inappropriate. It was beyond their developmental level, and we need to change it. So this exercise was designed not to get right answers and not to ask children perfect questions, but to the contrary, to ask children questions about legal terms that might actually occur within the system, and think about strategies to remedy the children's linguistic difficulties, and also to understand how they confuse words and how they process language at a young age. So I hope that when you interview your kids, even if you don't get a response, you ask them what you think it meant, and that your kids provide some perspective on how children's language develops and how they perceive language.